In the late Saxon and early Norman times, Bromyard was an ecclesiastical manor in the hands of the bishops of Hereford. Here was an important minster church with resident priests who not only served this church but also travelled locally to minister to the people of this part of Herefordshire. In the late 12th century, a borough was founded adjacent to the minster with the intention of bringing trade and prosperity to the manor. The street plan of the new town was virtually complete by 1300 and can still be seen today. The streets are lined by building plots known as burgages. These were the hallmark of a borough and were held by free burgesses who were granted privileges in return for an annual rent to the lord of the manor. The burgages were usually narrow plots of land running from the main streets to the back lanes or ways. These are still evident on present-day maps. In the late 12th century until the 19th century, markets and fairs were held in these medieval streets. Hawkers and stallholders occupied the market square. Poultry and dairy products were sold in Broad Street. Cruxwell Street was the sheep market. Milvan Lane was the venue for the horse fairs, and the swine market was held in Robury Street. High Street was the beast market. St. Peter's Church was built around 1160 on the site of the earlier Saxon church. It is a cruciform Norman building with a chancel, north and south aisles, transepts and nave, reflecting the growth of the new borough. It is the oldest building in the town and is Grade 1 listed. The massive tower, with its striking and unusual turret, is a dominant feature of the town viewed from the north and east. The chancel was enlarged in the early 14th century. One enters the church through the beautiful Norman doorway, with its 3 orders of shafts and decorated capitals and arches, with lozenge, rosette, and zigzag, reset when the church was enlarged. A high wall separates the churchyard from the old vicarage. The building is now used as council offices. The challenge was an ancient coffin way to the church. Around 1800 it was rerouted a few yards further south. The old cottage hospital is now called Challenge House. Entering the churchyard, over to the far left stands the one-time St. Peter's School, built in 1862 at a cost of £1,250. Early records of the school have been lost. It was an all-age elementary school until 1961, when the older children were moved up to the new secondary modern school off Panniers Lane. In 1971, St. Peter's children were joined by the infants from their school in Frog Lane. In the 1980s, the primary school moved to new premises. The old grammar school was originally founded in medieval times. In 1547, at the time of the suppression of the chantries, the King's Commissioners reported that a grammar school hath been continually kept in Bromyard. In 1566 the school was refounded by Queen Elizabeth I with different endowments. The school hall was rebuilt and more rooms added in 1835. The headmaster's house was built in 1897. In 1914 the school became coeducational. In 1969 the grammar school amalgamated with the Bromyard Secondary Modern School and is now known as the Queen Elizabeth Humanities College. This is the old police station, cells and magistrates' court. The courthouse was built in 1862-3 on what appears to have been a greenfield site. In 1875, however, the police station was added to the west wall of the courthouse, which allowed access to the court from the cells across the exercise yard via the police station. The final sitting of the court took place on the 16th of December 1987. Next to the courthouse is Dumbleton Hall, an 18th century stone house which has served as an early magistrates' court with cells beneath and later as a council chamber. In the middle of the 19th century, the county magistrates for the petty sessions of the 100 were meeting weekly on Mondays in the hall until it was considered to be too small, and the new courthouse was built in 1863. On the opposite side of Church Street there were at one time 5 pubs. The Red Lion is described in a deed of 1768. It was then in the possession of Elizabeth Chipp until her death in 1812. She does not seem to have run it as a pub, and there are no further references. The pub at number 27 changed its name 6 times in less than 60 years. Finally, in 1861, it became the Railway Inn when Parliament approved the construction of the Worcester to Leominster railway line. The pub's architectural merit is recognised by being Grade 2 listed. At number 15, the Bell Inn was previously known as the Three Horseshoes. It closed in 1936 when the licence was not renewed on the grounds it was not required. The Bromyard News and Record of the 14th of May 1936 stated that there was one public house in Bromyard for every 98 inhabitants. Yes. At the end of the street is the post office, built in 1911. In the mid-1800s it was situated at 19 Cruxwell Street, where the occupant, John Bennett, a music teacher and organist at St. Peter's Church, was the postmaster. The musician's window in the church is to his memory. The Bible House is a timber-framed building which dates from around 1600. The date of 1685 may refer to a refurbishment or a change of ownership. The name derives from a stream called the Bibble, which in earlier days flowed around the corner. It is now contained in underground pipes. It can still be seen in the cellar of the Crown and Sceptre Inn nearby. Along Robury Street, on the right, stands the old Record Office House, Robury Cottage and Robury House. This black and white building is a complete example of a typical Herefordshire and Worcestershire yeoman farmer's house of the 16th century. From Robury Street it is possible to see the timber-framed backs of the buildings that line Broad Street, where the framing is hidden by the later fashion for brick fronts. The buildings on High Street and Broad Street have burgage plots which back onto this street, Robury Street. The ground backing onto Robury Street has developed over the years into storage buildings and workshops. Tinton Brothers Joinery Workshop is reached through a narrow passage. The workshop is wedged between Broad Street and Robury Street. It is still a thriving business. The street contains an engineering factory, as well as small traditional businesses like Greaves Furniture. In 1285, the square was considerably larger. It was the site for hawkers, barrows and stalls. The alleyway between 35 and 39 Broad Street and Robury Street is thought to be the earliest west side of the market square. Houses were subsequently built on the intervening space. It is believed that one of these houses encloses an old town well. The steps down to it are very well worn. The prominent building is the Hop Pole Hotel, a Grade 2 listed building of around 1760. At one time, the old market house stood in front of the hotel, but it was demolished in 1844 when the market hall was built. Sherford Street is the continuation of the Veteri Vico, or Old Street. The Crown and Sceptre Inn is another timber-framed house, circa 1600, disguised by a brick exterior. In 1828, the pub was given its name by Thomas Lewis, the owner-occupier. A little further down the street stand the Congregational Church and Manse, which were built in 1701. The doorway of the church, with its Tuscan columns, is probably an early 19th century addition. It served the very active dissenters of Bromyard. The church has been made into houses. Next to the church is Bromyard's first lock-up house. Built in 1845, its walls are 20 inches thick. The small courtyard was surrounded by 12-foot-high walls. It closed down when the police station in Church Street was built 30 years later, and now stands as a converted dwelling house. Opposite the old jail is Sherford House, designed by the Shropshire architect Thomas Farnells Pritchard, and built circa 1760. It is a fine large red brick Georgian house of 5 bays. From 1898 to 1906 the house was the Bromyard Girls' High School, and from 1910 to 1913 it was the Convent High School for girls. The house is now privately owned. As the name implies, Broad Street was considerably wider at one time when it was used as an open marketplace. When the vicar, the Reverend Phineas Jackson, died in 1681 at the age of 51, he left a legacy of £40 to build a free school at 22 Broad Street, on the corner of Frog Lane. This was for the poor children of the parish to be taught reading, writing and sewing. In Frog Lane is a double doorway in the wall. This was where the old hand-operated fire engine was kept. The Falcon Hotel was built in the 16th century. The oak-panelled room on the first floor may have been constructed with meetings in mind. A report of 1851 stated that monthly manorial and quarterly county courts were held here. Opposite the Falcon Hotel stands number 3 Broad Street, a 3-storey 18th century house. It has fine brickwork and a superb front door, flanked by fluted Tuscan pillars and surmounted by an open pediment. Now you are in Pump Street. In 1788 a pump was erected here for the benefit of the poor. Nunwell Priory is a 17th century stone house from the period immediately after the Great Civil War. The building gives a hint of having had a small industrial undertaking carried out in it. The Tan House is an 18th century townhouse, behind which was the tan yard, with its pits and tall chimney to carry away the unpleasant smells well above the houses. This building was used for stabling horses in the late 17th century. Coaches left for Aberystwyth daily. Between 1948 and 1963 it served as a cinema. Now it has undergone a complete transformation and has emerged as a medieval banqueting hall and conference centre known as the Falcon Mews. The primitive Methodist chapel was built in 1899. It closed for worship in the late 1920s. In 1932, the United Methodists, the Primitive Methodists, and the Wesleyan Methodists were united to form the Methodist Church in New Road, and in 2007 it was converted into 8 apartments. Tower Hill House is a particularly fine example of a timber-framed house built in 1630. Although the street now seems detached from the town, it was the medieval lane to Avonbury, and houses were standing here in 1280. The Bay Horse Inn is a half-timbered pub from around 1620 and is Grade 2 listed. First built as 2 pubs, the Black Swan on the left and the Castle Inn on the right, it became known as the Bay Horse in around 1815, as its new owners, the Devereux family, were involved in racing events on the Bromyard Downs. The Queen's Arms is a 16th century inn and believed to be the oldest pub in the town. It changed its name 5 times in 50 years. It was called the Leopard Inn around 1770, hence the name Leopard Entry, which runs alongside from Robury Street. The King's Arms dates from around 1600. There are fine exposed timbers in the attic bedrooms. The jetted fronts of nearby houses and shops are of a similar period. The Bank House has spacious and dignified rooms, a peaceful, mature and quiet-walled garden. It has stabling with coach house access from Robury Street. It was built by William Milton and his son John in about 1836. At the corner of Cruxwell Street stands what is believed to be Bromyard's oldest secular building. This was a hall house from the 15th century, which was originally open from the ground floor to the roof. It has large moulded timber frames on the upper storey. At the end of Cruxwell Street, on the corner of Robury Street, are the almshouses, which form 3 sides of a courtyard. They were built in 1656 by the vicar, Reverend Phineas Jackson. A board over the front door reads, "Bromyard Non-Ecclesiastical Charities." These almshouses were erected in the early 17th century and are provided for poor women of good character from the ancient township of Bromyard. Peppercorn House belies its appearance. Left of the green entrance door and behind the stone walling is a 3-storey 17th century timber-framed house with originally a gabled roof facing onto Cruxwell Street. It was enlarged in the early 19th century to become a house with a grander entrance around the corner in Church Lane. This is our local history centre in Bromyard. You are welcome to come here to consult our pictures and records, or to find out more about what the Society does.